I'm Alex, and I'm an addict. And one of the things that's amazing for me is when I first got here, I don't know, I said that, and I came in, and I knew I was an addict. There was no doubt in my mind that I wasn't here because I ate too many tomatoes. I was here because, you know what, I just couldn't stop using. And but I also didn't understand what it was to be like being a recovering addict. I can tell you right now, I'm going to start out with my story. And my story is what it took me to get here. And the other part of that I'm going to share with you is my testimony. What this program's done for me, how it's lifted me out of some of the dark places I've been, and how it's poured into my life, and how it's, made me into somebody that you actually could have as a neighbor, possibly. And, that's been, it's been quite a journey. So I remember being a child, and I remember always feeling less than. I didn't feel like I fit in. I felt like there was always something missing, and I couldn't put my fingers on it. I didn't talk to anybody about it. I just kind of stayed to myself. I was an outgoing person, but I was also I was the person that I remember being inside my bedroom, and I remember putting records on, and I remember closing the door, and I remember just going into my own little world. And I didn't understand that at first. I didn't understand what that meant. And part of that is that I really didn't understand that I was priming myself for my own, that I was going to go down a path. And when I talk about the path, I think about having it being when I go down that path, as long as I stay on this one little path right here, everything's okay. But when I get off to the sides, when I start adding things to my life and I start doing that, is when it gets crazy. And I remember my mom being married, and she was married for 5 years every time. She had one that was 9 months. She was married 5 times. We moved from place to place, house to house, always packing stuff up. I had a sister, an older sister, and my sister, I always go back to feeling less than. I never felt smart. I just never felt like I was good enough. And I remember having, and even back then, I remember just having a hole inside of me, like something was missing. I didn't know what was missing, but something was missing. And Rob was talking about motorcycles. And one of the things that was huge for me is when I was about, I'd say 7 years old, I just kept to myself, but then eventually I got myself a little motorcycle. And what I would do is I would take and ride that little motorcycle down the road, and I'd ride on it with side saddles so that if the policeman came, I would make sure that I could jump off and pretend like I was walking with it. I remember the policeman pulling me over when he saw my little game I was playing there, and he said, "Where were you going?" And I was like, I was heading home, and I was going the wrong direction. And then he said, "What's your name?" And I said, "My name is Alan Jervis." And I get home after the police drag me home, and knocks on my door, and my mother answers the door, and she goes, "That is not his name." And that was the beginning for me of that. I became very comfortable, manipulating and doing it. And so then, I never forget it. And then I kept going through life, and things just were just going from place to place, real tough. And I kept getting these, so I graduated to a bigger sized dirt bike. And I remember going further this time. And now the police call my mom and say, he's 40 miles away. And my mom goes, how did he get 40 miles away? And what I would do is I would stash gas cans. And I would just keep going further and further and further. Because I was just trying to, because that was the only time I ever felt okay. I felt like I was by myself. Nobody could, and I had my own little plan. And this is where my family used all the time. And when I say that, I mean, I remember going to chicken roast in Pennsylvania, and I remember my Uncle Eddie standing by the keg, and he'd go, son of a, and he'd pee himself standing right there. And then I'd look at him and he'd go, don't worry about that, it's okay. And, and it didn't make sense to me, but somewhere in there, I was riding my dirt bike one day, and I was in the garage, and as I was filling up the gas tank, I went, that smells pretty good. And so, right after that, I remember that was my first drug of choice, is that I would just sit there and I would huff gasoline. And I remember my sister walking up the driveway one day, and I remember falling off the dryer that was in the garage. And I'd pop up and I'm like, ugh. And I liked the way it made me feel. I liked I didn't feel like I was here. I felt like I was somewhere else. I felt I didn't have that hole anymore. It was filled with something. And one of the big things for me is that I didn't know how that was going to play out later on in my life, what that hole was going to do to me. And a little more time goes by, and now I started doing that when I was 8 or 9 years old. A little more time goes by, and I'm 13 years old. And now what I'm doing is I'm going to people's houses, and at the time I called it bathroom commando. So I would just go into their bathrooms, anybody that let me in their door, and whatever I could find, I would take it. And I was just a garbage can. And I remember being 13 years old, and me and my sister would fight constantly. And one day my mom was looking through my hair, and she looked through my hair and she saw one little spot that was missing. And it was my freshman summer, and between my freshman and sophomore year. And I said, she ripped my hair out. And because we would have, drag outs. Like claw marks in my arms and all this craziness. And within 3 months, I lost all my hair. And I remember leaning forward and watching my hair go down, and I would just open up like a veil on the back of my head. And at this point, it was like feathered hair, real cool, this, that, and the other thing. And so my mom, she's trying to do me a solid, and so she takes me and she gets me fitted for a wig. And then I added to that a set of sunglasses, and I had these sunglasses that were red, yellow, and green. So when you tilted your head, they would change colors. And I'm going the right direction here, man. Things are going good. And so now I got this whole thing going on. I got bathroom commando, and now I start to find people that are into the same thing I'm into. And we're hanging out, and we're doing all the things that we did. And I remember stealing as a kid. And I would go into stores and I would steal. And at first it was stealing for fun, stealing for candy bars, whatever it was. But then eventually it came to stealing for using. And I didn't know that I was laying the groundwork for getting to a place that I wasn't here because I ate too many tomatoes. And when I lost my hair, I still belonged to a ski club. I was still part of a swim team, and I was in school. And I remember skiing that year right after I lost my hair. And I was going down this hill, and all of a sudden my hair went boom and flew away. So I went ahead and I wiped myself out. Meanwhile, I'm drinking whatever kind of liquor I had inside of a mustard bottle that I had with a twist top on the top of that thing. And all of a sudden I see this guy coming down the hill, and he's going back and forth. And when he's doing this, I see him go boop, and he picks up my hair with his ski pole. And he's coming down the hill, and he goes, "Here, dude, here's your hat." And I'm in the middle of this hill, and I put this hair back on, and I'm like, I hate my life. My life, this is bad. So soon after that, I went and I hung out with these people, and soon after that, I went to another party, and I was out doing what we did. And when I was at that party, someone went ahead and took my hair and ran away with it and threw it in a dumpster. And that was the day that I decided that I'm done with this. And so I went to school the next day, and I went, you know what? It's 1985, and this is not cool back then. And I walked through those doors. But I didn't have any armor. What I had was the armor that I had produced for myself, which was using. And so I made sure I did my bathroom commando thing. I made sure that I stocked up. At this point, I was starting to get friends that were supplying me with all this stuff. And I got to the place where I remember my mom walking into school one day. And she was married to a guy that was a schizophrenic. And I like playing bathroom commando. So I played bathroom commando one time, and I ended up stealing 2 or 3 prescriptions for lithium. And I took it for like 2 months. And when I took that, I didn't understand. It didn't make sense to me. I didn't read the bottle. I didn't have the internet. I didn't have anything. It just said, if it said whatever on the side of it, I was in. And so needless to say, I remember my mother walking in. I had gotten in trouble for selling drugs at school, and that's when they just came out with video cameras. And I remember her taking her hand in front of my face and going like this to check to see if I was even in there. And and all of this stuff is just getting me to the place where I don't know what to do with my life. I ended up graduating, and I went in the Marine Corps. And I ended up going there because my mom's schizophrenic husband at the time was in the Marine Corps, and it was his idea after I had gotten myself into that trouble dealing drugs at school. So I remember showing up in the Marine Corps, and when I got there, I remember I wore a little, I don't know, they called them kangaroo hats. That was like this golf hat. And I had this hat on, and I remember getting there and showing up and getting off that bus. And I remember them taking that hat off of my head. And it felt like the day that they took that wig off of me, and I just felt myself, and it just kept piling on to the place where, you know what, I had that hole inside of me that nothing could fill. And so when they started doing the Marine Corps thing and bossing me around, and I remember I went in right around Christmas time because my birthday is December 4th, and they'd go, I was there for about 3 days, and they'd go, "Oh, Yule!" And they would either, I could never figure it out whether it was Yule Tiding or Yule Brenner. And I really didn't ask because it probably wasn't the thing to do at the moment. And I remember going through basic training, and I went to my first duty station and got there, and I just kept doing what I was doing. As soon as I got off of there, I was right back to where I was at before. The only difference is now I had a place that gave me food and gave me a place to live, but I still was feeding that. I was still the bathroom commando guy, but I was just feeding it every other way that I could. And that was really hard. I wish that I could have had the gift that I have today when that happened then. Because my life, this story would be, and this is the story, it would have been a lot different. But what happened is I ended up spending time in the Marine Corps, and over some time, I just couldn't keep keeping on. And I couldn't keep up with what they were doing and the lifestyle I was living. I couldn't exist in two worlds anymore. And so now I'm starting to it goes back to that whole thing is, you know what? I can't serve two masters. I can't live in the darkness and in the light. And I just felt myself slipping further and further into that darkness. And I got out of the Marine Corps, and I was out for maybe 6 months, and I decided that my best thinking was to move to a dry town in the middle of North Carolina and start manufacturing marijuana. And so I was doing that, and I had a roommate and his girlfriend were there. And when I was there, we had one little plant that was in the house. It was a male plant. And I named it Robert. That was the name of the plant. So he was Robert Plant. And needless to say, you see where I'm cultivating all this. And that was the first time my roommate had sold drugs to an underage kid, and he turned us in. And he thought that this kid thought he was turning us in for Robert Plant, not all that. And so the next thing I know, I'm in a dry town in the middle of North Carolina. I get charged, my roommate gets charged, and his girlfriend gets charged. My friend's girlfriend, her parents bonded both of them out and got them out and got them a lawyer. And I just sat there and rotted for 17 months in jail. And this also tells you, too, that part of my story there is that I didn't call anybody. I didn't tell my mom. I didn't call anybody. Zero, nobody. I just went off the radar. I just was like, you know what? And I remember spending that time in there, and it was the first time that I felt safe. I felt safe from me. And that was huge, So that was something. And even when I was in the Marine Corps, I was like kind of Otis on Mayberry, where I'd end up in jail on the weekends. That was kind of my thing. And when I would use, I was good for about maybe 4 to 6 hours, and then after that, I broke out in handcuffs, and it was time to get put back in the clink. And I came back I was down in North Carolina. I spent my time down there. I came back. My mother knew what was going on with me. And so we moved from Willoughby, which is a small town in Ohio, and we moved further out, and we bought a log cabin. And I had a friend that I was dealing drugs with in Ohio, and he said, "You need to go to a meeting." And I'm like, as he's sitting there with his nose in a bag going like this, and I'm sitting there like with a bottle going like this, and he says, "You need to get to a meeting." And I don't think he was happy, too, because this was right after I pretended that I lost my keys in his house, but I really didn't leave them because I didn't really have a place to go, so I kind of did the I lost my keys, please don't kick me out thing. And so needless to say, he dropped me off at my first meeting, and at the same time, I had gotten a job at an auto parts store, and I was still like living the lifestyle. And there's something that I was more of a white collar crime kind of guy. So my best thinking was I had this job at this auto parts store, and he dropped me off to go to my first meeting. And the part that I didn't tell anybody when I went to my first meeting is that I was working at this auto parts store in the middle of the ghetto, and I was taking alternators and starters, and when people would buy them to get a return, the core part of it, where you would bring the old one back, I was going to junkyards and buying boxes and boxes of these things, and I had like 10 people helping me return all these things, and that's how I fed my disease. Needless to say, I go to my first meeting, and it was the Shalom group. And I went there, and I didn't know they had other meetings. This was on a Wednesday night. And I go to the Shalom group, and I go there, and I suck down. I remember they had a bowl of candy, and they had some donuts, and they had some coffee. And if you talk to any of my friends, they'll tell you how I am with coffee, and it's not good. I don't have a good relationship with that either. And so needless to say, I go to this meeting, and I suck down the whole bowl of candy that's on the table, and I eat like 12 donuts, and I drink like 4 cups of coffee. And so I don't know what to do, so I go back again the next time, and I do the same thing. And an old timer walks up to me, and he goes, "You know there's a place for people like you." And I said, "Really?" And he goes, "Yes." He goes, "Tomorrow night, go to this church, and when you go to the church, you're going to walk around the back, and you're going to see people just like you." And I remember going to my first Narcotics Anonymous meeting, and now we're starting to get into the testimony part of this, is that I go to my first Narcotics Anonymous meeting, and I look over, and Mary's right there, but I see Mary walking down this hill, and it's like these sandstone steps, and I'm like, I don't see girls like this where I go. They're just not like this. I hung out at like your feet stuck to the floor most of the places that I went to. And so needless to say, and then I see a guy standing in the parking lot, and his name is Randy D. And I see him out there, and he's cleaning his car in the parking lot, and he's got one leg that's shorter than the other, and he's got a pit bull, and he's got his cane, and he's wandering around this car, and this car is spotless. And I'm like, and then all of a sudden I see a girl come flying in the parking lot, and she's driving a BMW, and she comes flying in the parking lot, and I'm like, okay, maybe they don't have candy, and maybe they don't have donuts, but life's good. So I walk up and I go to the second floor of that, and I do not remember my first meeting. I can honestly say I do not remember. I don't remember my first 2 AA meetings, and at the Shalom group, and I went to Backdoor Recovery, was my first Narcotics Anonymous meeting. And all I remember, though, in that meeting is I remember the girl that came in with the BMW. She was a beautiful girl. And I remember her talking about wanting to drive into a bridge in Buckman. And I'm like, I love these people. I'm like, these are my people. This is where I need to be. And at the same time, I was telling you, we're going to go back because at the same time while I'm doing that, the FBI was working on something behind the scenes with my little starter alternator exchange program I had going on. So at this point, I had graduated to a full-blown addict, my drug of choice. My mother worked third shift, and when the FBI came into the house, I was inside the bathroom getting high in the shower stall, in the shower. And it was like a 32-inch shower, so I'm in there like getting high, and needless to say, I was like, what do I do with this? And so they went ahead and they arrested me. And my mother is such a great enabler. I just love my mother for enabling me for all those years, because she would co-sign my stuff time after time after time. And she's like, the FBI's in her house. She comes home at 7 o'clock in the morning. They're there at about, I don't know, right about that time. And meanwhile, there I am. I look like my eyes are like this, and they're ripping the house apart. And she's going, not my boy. Not my boy. He did not do this. And I'm going, Mom, I did this. He did not do this. And so needless to say, that was February 17th of 1991 is when they did that. And that's when I decided that I probably should go to more of these Narcotics Anonymous meetings, considering I was looking at like 27 counts. And at that point, I didn't know a whole lot as far as, I remember keep coming back. It works if you work it. Work it, you're worth it. And I remember just feeling like, at least when I was there, I wasn't going to get high. But here's where this gets really weird, is I just introduced myself as, hi, I'm Alex, and I'm an addict. And I don't add anything to that. I used to a long time ago. And because some people will say, hi, I'm an addict, and I'm gratefully recovering, or whatever it is. And the only difference is my clean date is October 23rd of 1993. And in between that time period, right there, I can tell you that I wasn't recovering. I was going to meetings, and I would put together 2 or 3 weeks or a month. And people got sick of hearing me. I remember people saying, I like you, but you just lie too much. And I remember I had a friend of mine, they wasn't in recovery, and I was hanging out with him over at his motorcycle shop. Really great guy. And I said, yeah, I went to see Bob. And I said, I hung out with him yesterday. And he goes, I like you. He goes, but Bob's on vacation. And he goes, you don't need to lie to me. It was the first time someone actually had told me something like that. And the beautiful part of this is that I kept coming to meetings, and I might not have stayed clean. But what I did do is I did take 2 or 3 words, maybe a sentence away from a meeting here and there. And eventually it got to the point where meetings are not for people that want them. Meetings are for people that need this program. You know, like I said, I didn't come here because I ate too many tomatoes, but there's still a lot of people that are going to die from this disease tonight. And, you know, there's jails, institutions, stuff, and my favorite, which was always really good for me, was degradation. And, you know, so for me, I know that I just kept coming back. And there was times, I remember having, so one time I quit smoking cigarettes, and I said, well, if I quit smoking cigarettes, before I get high, I can always have a cigarette. So there I am sitting at the dope house, and I'm doing dope, and they said, would you like a cigarette? And I go, oh, no. And I'm like, Oh no. So that didn't work for me. I can tell you that did not work. So, so it goes back to that this is a thinking problem. And you know what? I can't think my way into that solution. I have to act my way into that. And so in between 1991 and 93, and the other thing that I did that was very, very, I had like 8 months clean. And I had lied to everybody and told them I had like a year clean. And I was getting ready to go to the meeting to get my year key tag. And I was going to glow in the dark. And needless to say, I went the other way, and I went ahead and I went, you know what, I'm going to just get high. And the reason I got high is because you can't save your face and your ass at the same time. And you know what? I wish I would have known that. I wish I would have heard that back then. Because now I know that today. And so all this stuff is really, when I say that it's part of my testimony, my testimony is that you know what? If I can get clean, anybody can get clean. And the other part of that is that, all I needed to do was figure out that I need this. And then I remember going to my sponsor, and at the time, my sponsor, I had Randy D was my first sponsor. And I remember going to him when I was still trying to get clean. And I said, I slipped. And he goes, no, slip is something you do on a banana peel. You effing used, and don't you ever minimize what you did. And he goes, but I can tell you this. I can tell you that I'm proud that you came and told me that you actually used. And he goes, I don't know if I could ever do that. And about 6 months later, he picked up. He didn't tell anybody. And he took a pistol and put it in his mouth and blew his brains out. You know what? That was my first real wake-up call. That this is for real. And that this was something that, you know what? I knew what was going to happen to me. There was no question in my mind where my disease was going to take me. Because those were thoughts that I had. Those were things that hid dark in that darkness. That was that part of that hole. That was part of that hole that needed filled. And so slowly over time, I started working on steps. And part of that for me is that I need to know that my first step is just that acceptance. Is that this is what I am. And it's okay. And that's my first part of recovery, is knowing that, you know what, that it's okay to have the disease of addiction. And that when I say I'm an addict, I know it through and through. And then I worked on my second step, which was, for me, gives me hope. And at the end of the second step in there, it talks about opening a door to a God. And at the time, I didn't have a God. And at the time, my sponsor, I got a new sponsor, and Danny R., and he's since passed away. But he died, he had cancer. And so for me, I know that when I talk about God, I talk about, at first I started out with good orderly direction. And then I started out with, he said, you can use mine until you get one of your own. And I remember standing there and knowing that I needed everything that this program had to offer, because I was still a mess. I mean, I was still just a mess. And using it was only a symptom of my addiction. That I couldn't make enough bad decisions And my next sponsor, and I'm going to move on to him real quick, is one of the things that he told me is I can make enough bad choices in one day to change the rest of my life. And that was, I talk about those one sentence or 3 words that can change my life. That was one of those. And I remember doing some of the things that I did, and I remember that playing through my head. I went ahead and my sponsor at the time told me that I shouldn't date anybody for a year. And no, wait, this is okay. So I went to a Halloween dance. Hi, Mary. And I went to a Halloween dance, and there used to be all these girls that sat together. And I walked over to one of them, and it wasn't you, Mary. And I walked over to one of them, and I said, "Would you like to dance?" Because I didn't even go to dances in school. I just didn't do any of this. So like this whole Narcotics Anonymous dance thing was like completely new to me. And she said no. And I walked back over, and they had out like, lunch meat and cheese. And so I sat there and ate 7 or 8 sandwiches. And so using is just a symptom of my disease. And I remember, these are all the things that gave me something. These were all things that I learned from. These are things I didn't learn when I was out there using. These are things that I wasn't taught by my parents. These are things that were through your own strength, hope, and experience. And it was funny because the other week about 2 weeks ago, I went to a recovery and relapse workshop. And at that recovery and relapse workshop, I went to a couple different workshops, but one of the workshops they had, and I just had to bite, was called Dinosaurs. So I go, okay, I'll go in there. And I get in there, and it's talking about how the road gets narrower as you gain clean time and as you start going through the things in your life. And it was just amazing too to see, and it's amazing because Rob introduced me, and these are people I've known for 20, 30 years at this point, and that have poured into my life. And then there's some of them that I have not always been a great example of someone in recovery, and I certainly have had my share where anger and rage are all things. They're a drug for me too. They're just as much a drug as any of the other ones. And needless to say, at the same time, I went ahead and I found myself my first wife in recovery. And I remember going to a Wednesday night meeting, and I saw this girl, and she was wearing flip-flops and jeans and a white beater T-shirt, and that was pretty much it. And she had she was walking, and I was like, at that point, I hadn't asked a girl out, and my sponsor was like, no, really, at this point, I had a year and 6 months or 8 months clean, and he's like, really, you could. And so I asked her out, and we ended up getting married. And when we got married, I just remember, I liked that. I liked that whole thing of having someone else in my life to share my life with, especially having some recovery. But it didn't really work out like that. And so I got married to my first wife, and she was in recovery, and we went on our honeymoon, and we were gone for 2 or 3 weeks. We come back from our honeymoon, and I should have known. We rented a place to have our wedding at, and when we rented this place, her brothers came from Texas, and we had an open bar and they got in a fight with the police because they wanted to take all the open containers with them. And at the same time, I was getting married to my first wife. At my wedding, my mother was standing there, and I had a good friend that I had met in recovery. And my mother was standing there as I was getting married and said, "You should marry this one." And needless to say, my first wife was not real happy with that. And you know what? I just can't even make this up. I can't make this stuff up. So needless to say, I go on my honeymoon. I come back from my honeymoon. And her 2 brothers, her mother, and 3 kids moved in my house. And to top it off, I had lice in my house now. Then they blamed it on me. Are you sure you didn't? I'm like, I am absolutely positive with what I got going on that is just not even possible. There's a lot of things I've done in my life, but that's not one of them. So I shaved them all like cue balls. And the house I lived in wasn't enough for this whole thing. And for my wife wasn't happy with what we had. And me, I was like, I had my job, I was going to meetings, things were going good. I was going to, I was part of service, I was staying involved, I was taking my sponsors' suggestions, and things were going along. And we got a bigger house, and I got a bigger job, and she used with 10 years clean. So now I had my wife using and her whole family using with her. And I would come home and one of her brothers would be passed out in the side yard. And because my wife would fight with the neighbor, I had a string with sticks going down the side of my house to keep this is your side and that's your side. And no, you don't cross that line. And I just remember, I don't know, I guess when I make decisions, and I have to remember how important making decisions is that when I make decisions, a lot of times I make decisions for the wrong reason. And I don't make them, I try and think my way into a decision instead of looking into my heart and looking into my recovery and reaching out to all these people that I've met in recovery to help and say, do you think this is a good idea? Because I had people like at the wedding going, no. And so we ended up getting divorced. And at that time, I was really down. I was like, you know what? I think I need to go to Ripley. So I go to Ripley, and I'm riding my motorcycle, and I get to Ripley, and I do like any good addict would do, or what I would do. And I went over and stood by the bridge, and I waited till there was a girl that looked like she might want to take me into her room. So I asked a few, and I came across one, and she took me in. And so I went ahead and I did the right thing, and I married her. I just figured, hey, I mean, what could go wrong? What could go wrong? I mean, So we get married. She's got about 3 years clean. And this is my when I say this is my experience, this is what I went through. And this just shows you that, for me, that drugs are only a symptom of my disease. My thinking, I don't know, you can figure that out. And so needless to say, she had about 3 years clean. We get married, we go on our honeymoon, we come back, and I decided that she should go off birth control. And literally, I think we had, she was pregnant by the time we came back from our honeymoon. And needless to say, the 9 months she was pregnant were just amazing. She was just amazing, just like the most amazing person. And I was like, this is really, I got this going on. Bought a house because I had to give half of my stuff away from the last one. And needless to say, I bought a house. And when I bought the house, we were hanging out there, and then we had my daughter. And my daughter, some of the spiritual principles, and I have acceptance, hope, faith, courage, honesty, and one of my favorites is patience. Humility, willingness, brotherly love, integrity, and self-discipline, and service and servant-hearted. And so for me, we named our daughter Patience. And my beautiful baby girl. And I remember her coming into this world, and I was never so excited. And we were married a little bit longer, and my wife went into like postpartum, and then she went into using, and then it went into child abuse. And I remember her sitting over the top of my daughter and changing a diaper and punching her fist on the ground next to her head over and over again. And this is one that I came up with. This I did not hear at a meeting. And this is if I preside over it, I condone it. If I preside over something, that means I condone it. If I let it happen under my roof, and I have a way to change that, then that means that I condone it. And I went to my wife's mother at the time, and I said, you know what? I can't do this anymore. And her parents were real well off, and she basically said, I will open a checkbook if you stay married, and you will not have to worry about much for the rest of your life. And I said, yes, I will. I have to worry about what I have going on under my house, under my roof. And I went ahead and I have full custody of my daughter. And she was 4 years old. And I get a phone call from a friend. Remember when I got married the first time and my mother went, hey, you should marry that one. I'm married to that one right now. And you know what? It's just amazing. You know, I talk about, you know, that hole that was inside of me. And you know what? I can tell you right now, what filled that hole is God. And God filled that hole for me. And part of the thing for me is that we ended up, I was just got divorced. I had custody of my daughter. I was overwhelmed. I was trying to work. My mom was helping me out. And I had this person that was my friend come back into my life. And we hung out. And I remember coming to, and people would see us and they'd ask her and they'd go, is that your boyfriend? And she'd go, no. And then someone would ask me, is that your girlfriend? I'd be like, yes, she is. Yep. And she'd be like, no, I'm not. And I'd be like, they didn't ask you. And that's called self-will. So needless to say, I went ahead and at the same time, and this is part of this story that is, when I got divorced and I had my daughter, I went to Narcotics Anonymous meetings, and my ex-wife went to the fellowship also still. And I just couldn't get okay in my own skin going to a meeting, and I just wanted a place that I felt safe. And so I was looking for this place to feel safe. And I was just talking to Rob about this right before I was speaking. And I saw a flyer over at the Harley shop. And it said, I ride a Harley. And it said, this motorcycle club was having a party. So at the same time, I have my daughter. I have full custody. My mom's helping me out. I have my wife Erica, who's not my wife yet, and I go to my first party for this motorcycle club. And what I'm going to say about the motorcycle club is I'm going to say that when you think about a motorcycle club, it's the one that first comes to your mind. And so, needless to say, I show up there, and I remember sitting at this bar, and there was these guys sitting there. And I was real quiet, and I was sitting there, and I went and I said hi to a couple of them, and they weren't real friendly. But as I was walking away, one of them said, "If you like what you see, then just keep coming around." And this wasn't the same Narcotics Anonymous keep coming back. This was the, if you like what you see. And I remember walking out in the parking lot, and one of the guys said, "Hey, were you in my saddlebag?" On the side of his bike. And I said, "No." And I guess what was attractive, and at this point I had like probably 18 years clean. And I think what was attractive is that, they didn't ask me where I was going, what I was doing. There was no questions. There was zero questions. I could hide. And so I hid. And, and I'm going to go back to this as a thinking problem. That my addiction will take me to places that I just can't even imagine if I let it run wild. And so I was hanging out with these guys, and I remember Rob, not too long ago, saying, "I remember seeing your motorcycle sitting out in front of this clubhouse, but I didn't know what to do." And I finally was married to my wife, and she'd go, "Where are you going?" "I can't tell you." "When are you going to be home?" "Can't tell you that either." "What are you going to be doing?" "I can't tell you that either." And I was always the quiet, sneaky one. I was the one that helped you figure out who did this to you. And needless to say, I got to the place where my wife at the time, which is my wife now, it got to the place where my anger, my rage was just off the charts. I've had to make amends to people in the rooms, that are good friends, dear friends, because one of them for sure, I know I scared him half to death one time. And so for me, I was a part of this motorcycle club, and when I was doing that, there was a girl that I'm going to speed forward a little bit there, and so I just did that, and I was keep doing that. And there was a girl that used to come to meetings by the name of Lori, and her ex-husband was a president of one of these motorcycle club chapter things. And needless to say, I went to Ripley with her at one point. I went here. And I was at the clubhouse one night, and my wife had left me. She went to Alabama because she was over me. She was over what I was doing, and goes back to if she presided over it, that means she condoned it. And I could see that look on her face, and I knew the disgust in her eyes, and I knew that it was probably warranted for sure. And I went to a party one night. Well, I won't say one night. I went to a 3-day party. And I went to this 3-day party, and I was inside, and I was grinding up stuff to hand out to people. And I was also there, and this girl that was in recovery that came to Ripley with me 20 years before that, I went to go eat a piece of tiramisu cake. And she said, no, that's laced with blah, blah, blah. And I just saw the writing on the wall. It wasn't if, it was when I was going to pick up, when I was going to use. And I went home and I actually left. And when I left that night, I just kind of took off out of there. And man, they were not happy with what I was doing, what I had going on. Because I just like, and when I say I left, I mean I like smoky, wheelie out of there. And it was one of those things where you don't leave until it's over. And about 2 weeks later, I went in and I stood in front of those guys. And that's one of those things where you don't know how that's going to go. And I stood in front of these guys and I said to them that it's not if, it's when I'm going to use. And if I do use, I'm going to go ahead and I know how it ends for me. Jails, institutions, death, and degradation. And I knew that, you know, that wasn't how I wanted to go. And I walked away, and I went ahead and I got a new sponsor, because my old sponsor, he presided over what I was doing, and he I don't know if he condoned it, but he certainly presided over it. And I got a new sponsor. My new sponsor is Mac. I went to a Wednesday night meeting, and my sponsor, I went there, and when I went to that meeting, there was another Mac there. I came to Ripley. I was standing right up front there, and I turned around, and there was Mac. And I went to that meeting, and when I prayed the night before, a couple days before, Wednesday night, and then Friday I was here, God told me that I would have Mac as my sponsor. And I can tell you right now that, you know, I know without God in my life, without recovery in my life, without all the people that have poured into me in my recovery, I would not be standing up here tonight. I am so grateful. And one of the other things that I can say here too is that for me to have a program and to have a God in my life, I need to not be self-centered. I need more God-centered. I need less of me and more of God. And when I say that, I mean more program too. I need more recovery. I need to keep digging deep. And one of the other things there too is that for me, prayer is huge. I go ahead and I pray every day. I actually pray with my employees. I'm an employer, and I pray with my employees. And, you know, for me, I know that when I pray that my words have power. And that I know that narrow path that I need to stay on is only through the grace of God. And it's what lifts me up. I work steps, and the literature that's here is amazing. But until I got to that third step and got a God in my life, and you know what? I remember someone talking to me, and I was telling him about my God, and he says that he's got a bigger God. And that, for me, was, you know what? That means that it covers all the brokenness inside of me. It covers all the things that I just talked about that push me down, that tell me that I have that hole inside of me that can't be filled. But I know today it can be filled with God. I'm just grateful to be here tonight. I'm grateful for the time you've spent to listen to me. And I just hope I can lift you up. And if you ever need somebody to pray over you or with you, you know what? Many people did it for me and poured their recovery into me and their time into me. And I'm just so grateful. With that, I'll pass.